welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today I have an episode I have been looking forward to sharing with you for I don't know how long. I am very excited about today's episode in case that is not blatantly obvious at this point. Before we get into that, though, I would like to remind everybody that you can support me over on Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula, you can help me out to provide pro bono services to those who cannot afford them. And you will get early access to my podcast. You can see the video from today's interview, and you will get grief affirmations once a month, some memes, some Q&As, and all sorts of other goodies. So head on over to patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula. Okay, now without further ado, I'm just going to get into it because I am so excited about today's episode. I had just the most dynamic, amazing, wonderful conversation with Lisa Vigil Shattinger from Ohio End of Life Options. So I'm just going to let you listen to this. However, the main topic and the main reason I wanted to have her on this episode or on my podcast is to talk about the facts all around medical aid in dying. So obviously this episode will be talking about medical aid in dying. So call that a trigger warning if you want. If you don't think you can handle this episode, by all means skip it. But I highly recommend you listen to this one. We go into great detail and really just kind of hammer in the facts and the stigmas and everything else around medical aid in dying. I just wanted to share this so bad. It's unfortunately a hot button topic, and I don't like that. I wish this was just something we could just talk about, but whatever. This is the world we live in. So without further ado, I'm going to stop talking and just get on with it. Here is my conversation with Lisa from Ohio End of Life Options. All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this week. I am so excited for my guest today. I reached out to my new dear friend, because everybody I have on the show is a friend, Lisa Vigil Shattinger. I got it right. Okay. Lisa is with Ohio End of Life Options, and I'm going to let her introduce herself a little bit, tell us a little bit about you, what Ohio End of Life Options is and what you do, and then we'll get into it from there.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I just have such respect for all you're doing. So thank you for this opportunity. I am the executive director and founder of Ohio End of Life Options. We started formally in 2016, and we do a few things. We really encourage people to start to think about the end of their life. We very much live with the thought that death is a part of life. And so we have to act very intentionally. And so we really encourage people to talk about what they want their end of life process to be, and specifically kind of in the healthcare space. So, what medical decisions they need to make moving forward. What are some of the tools they can use to do that type of thing, to document them using, legal things that are legal in Ohio, your advanced directive, which includes a healthcare proxy, appointing a healthcare proxy, and your living will. And then having great conversations with your loved ones, your healthcare proxy, your health team, to understand those end-of-life wishes. And the reason that I got into that whole space is because in 2014, my stepfather, who lived in Oregon with my mother, I'm originally from Oregon. My stepfather was a retired neurologist. My mother is a retired nurse. And so they both had, you can understand, a lot of personal and professional experience with death and dying.
Yeah.
And my mother and I kind of were in a space that's not uncommon to people, in which we had a lot of loved ones and maybe friends who were facing end of life issues, and either my mother or I were healthcare proxy
Mm-hmm.
for people. And it was just so eye-opening to me, the very difficult, not only decisions to be made, but the process of making those decisions and then the care being given in that process. So during all of this, when my various grandparents died over the years and family friends and things, my stepfather, who I was very close to, who actually my mother and stepfather lived in our home here in Ohio every winter for about 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had lots of really, I think, helpful and important conversations, about the end of life. And he was diagnosed with a terminal illness then in 2014. And since he lived in Oregon, he had access to what they call the Death with Dignity Act.
Mm-hmm.
That's the name of their law.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was with him when he died. He was, that's one of the processes we'll talk about later, is that it's a very, again, intentional process. And I was with him, with his family, and my mother and my brother when he died. And that experience was just so remarkable and so exactly so according to his wishes,
Mm-hmm.
um, that it was just, I knew that it was, I didn't know the degree to it, but I knew that it was life changing in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to my mother on that day, I think we really need to talk about this. So I came back to Ohio and shared my story, which was quite unique at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that people really came to my table saying, I need to, first of all, share their own stories, because we don't
Mm-hmm.
get a lot of opportunities for that.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we move forward to have options like this in Ohio?
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of the process of starting the 501(c)(3).
Awesome.
Long
Ah,
story.
I love that. And I know so many people personally, and I've had people on the show that have started nonprofits out of their own life experiences when they have found gaps in care and or gaps in service or whatever. And they like, I gotta fix this. So I always commend people who take that initiative, right? Because well, otherwise we wouldn't have all of these things. And it's one of those, you don't recognize it until you're in it. And then when you're in it, you
Yeah,
recognize
no.
how many other people are out there suffering because XYZ is not available. So, I always thank people who start nonprofits out of passion. So thank you for doing that.
You
Um,
know what? I'm going to actually stop and make a comment on
oh,
that,
okay.
because this is kind of a little bit of something that I like to point out, that I did not in any way have the ability to do this on my own. I mean, we often hear that it takes a
Sure.
team, but I just have to really say that um, one of the things that I brought to the table was a willingness to say yes to help, to
Hmm.
say, I don't know what I'm doing. And so every person that I found that came to the table brought a unique set of skills, and they were willing to share those, to teach me, to help move this issue along. And there is no way we would be where we are today without the efforts of all of that and the ability to say yes to help.
Yeah.
So I'm just putting that out there to
Yeah.
people, that that brings tremendous gratitude and kind of an element of joy to it, I would say.
Yeah. And thank you for pointing that out. And I talk all the time. I'm on the board for a nonprofit here called Let the Light In. We provide support for women who've experienced pregnancy and infant loss. And Cami, who started it, I've had her on the show. She's a good friend of mine, wanted to start this for years because of her experiences. And she couldn't have done it without all the people on the board, right? Like she was like, I want to do this. Who can help me? And there were a lot of other people. And how many women, like 1 in 4 women, have suffered this? And that's
Yes.
statistically, anecdotally, I feel like it's way more. So yeah. Anyway, we're getting into the weeds. Oh, I've got to keep us on track. So let's just get right into it, because the main reason I really wanted to have you on my show today, because I've mentioned medical aid in dying several times on my show. And I want to make sure that my listeners are educated and know the facts, because this is kind of a hot issue at times. So Tell us a little bit about what medical aid in dying is, what it means.
Thank you. So medical aid in dying is legislation. It's a law that allows a person who is an adult, all of the US only works with an adult who is terminally ill, competent to make informed health care decisions, who has 6 months or less to live, and is able to request, go through the steps to qualify for, and then if they qualify for medication, then they can decide if and when they decide to take a medication that will hasten their imminent death because they have a terminal illness. Usually these people are quite advanced in their illness, toward the end of their days.
Mm-hmm.
And that, but you have to carve out a legal space to allow that process, not only for a physician to write a prescription if requested and the person qualifies, but to put safeguards in place so that this is not just happening in any way or any time or for anybody, but want to create parameters through these laws.
Yeah. And thank you very much. That was a perfect way to describe that. And so you brought up there's like a lot of stipulations, and I feel like that is one of the misconceptions is like how not easy this actually is to obtain, even in states where it's legal. I feel like people have this picture in their mind, you just pick up the phone and somebody gives you a bunch of drugs and you get to take them, and that's that. And that is, and I know that is not how that works. So what are some of the other misconceptions that you hear a lot of out there about medical aid in dying?
Hollywood does us no favors.
Nope.
On the one hand, they're willing to raise the issue, and yet they do it so incorrectly that it's not a favor because it's commonly portrayed as, hey, doc, can't I just do anything? Where's the pill I can take and get this over with? Instead of the really careful parameter. Again, the safeguards require more than one healthcare provider examine them to make sure that they agree with the diagnosis and prognosis time frame of 6 months or less to live, that they're competent to make those decisions, again, that they meet all of these qualifications. And so it's in no way something. Another misconception is that somebody else can start this process or finish it. Right. It is completely voluntary and self-directed by the person who has the terminal illness. They have to be the one making the request. They have to be the one going through the steps, making these visits to different doctors or healthcare providers, and then deciding if or when to take the medication. Anyone can change their mind. I think something important to recognize is that because this is a states' right issue, so every state that has a law like this carefully considers it, figures out the parameters that make sense in their state. So they tweak it a little, right? Everyone has their own thumbprint on these laws. They're all based on Oregon's model, but they have evolved from there. So it's important that people understand that if they're in a state with this law, they have to know exactly what that state's law looks like.
Yeah.
So that's really important. And it's important that, like, New Mexico now allows that if a person is enrolled in hospice care, that they no longer need a second provider, because hospice is essentially already taken two providers to qualify the person to make sure that they have that prognosis of terminal illness and timeline of 6 months or less. So unfortunately, some research. So we really feel like that's the gold standard coming up to start talking about that as an important issue. The other thing to really recognize is that we all truly support good end-of-life care, quality end-of-life care. We really advocate for great access to palliative and then hospice care. People think, well, this is an either or, why do I need hospice care if I'm just going to choose this? Well, the point is that we want you getting really good end of life care because you're probably declining in health over this process. And so we want those symptoms managed. We want you to have that care. And then again, if you decide to take the medication, that's your right if you qualify. In states with laws, the vast majority of people are also enrolled in hospice care.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for bringing that up especially about the two, needing two doctors, because again, it's not as easy as just like having that one doctor is going to sign anything with a wink, wink. You can't, it doesn't work that way. You also mentioned something that I wanted to ask because I can't remember, but I know there is a statistic that has been because they're keeping all sorts of great records with everybody that has utilized medical aid in dying so far. But it is actually a quite small percentage of people who are approved who actually follow through with taking. Isn't it like 30% or something like that? Do you know?
So in states with the laws, the people who actually die after ingesting the medication is less than 1% of deaths during a given year.
Okay. Okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So the actual amount of people who overall, when you're looking at deaths in a state.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
there's the qualification process, and they say that about a third. So the study I'm thinking of is out of California. And as I recall, about a third of the people who started the process, and I think it was through Kaiser, there started the process, died before completing the process.
Right.
So one of the things that has changed because of that is they amend the laws to change the waiting period.
Yep.
So there's a first request in a visit with a physician. There's a second request. And there's usually a time frame between those dictated by whatever law, by whatever state, and they vary. And so one of the things they do is add a piece that says a providing physician can waive that waiting period if they think the death is really imminent.
Okay.
So not every state has that amendment, but some do.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know too. And I try, like I get asked questions about medical aid in dying all the time. And I always have to caution, like in the states where it's legal, everyone's different. So you have to look up that state, and I will try to do my due diligence and look if I can. But, so I'm going to quiz you. So I try to have this memorized.
Oh boy.
Do you know which, I'm sure you do, but which 10 states are the ones that have legalized medical aid in dying?
Sure. So I'm going to start with the West Coast. So Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, California. Then we go to Colorado, New Mexico, Vermont. This is not in order of who passed it.
Yeah, I
know. Vermont, Maine, Washington, D.C., New Jersey. Why do I feel like I'm
and I stopped counting. Did we miss?
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's Montana allows
that's right,
it because their state Supreme Court decided that it's an option. They don't have a law, so we don't really know the status of how many people are using it or anything like that. But it's allowed.
Okay, good to know. So where are there states that have something pending, like a bill that is like in process that you know of?
So this year, I hope so. I just saw that it looks like New Hampshire is back again. They and Delaware, I believe, is just pending. They're right on the verge of proposing legislation. I believe Illinois. I don't know, and I think that New York is also reintroducing. So there's lots of states that are considering reintroducing. It's sort of what the timeline is for all of that. So I imagine others will at least try. Not all of you, they're not successful.
Yeah. And I am not shy on my displeasure with a lot of things in Ohio, and I just feel like we're going to be one of the last if we ever allow it. And we'll get there in a second, but I and this is my personal opinion. I'm expressing my opinion, solely me, Nikki the Death Doula. Um, I hate that there has to be laws for this. Like, there's no law that says you can and can't have hospice, right? Hospice is a beautiful program that's available to the people who qualify for it. Why the hell do we have to have passed laws for this? And I get there are reasons why. We can get into the weeds all day about that, but this is one of those things where it comes to somebody's life and their health. And I hate that there has to be laws that,
Yeah, I think that I'm going to bring up the name of Jack Kevorkian
yeah, I know
because
everybody, when I talk about medical aid now, like, oh, like Jack Kevorkian. I'm like, well, go ahead.
so I think what he did was really expose a couple of things. He
Mhm,
exposed that people wanted this as an option and would take advantage of it,
mhm.
and that physicians were willing to provide that to them.
Yeah,
But what it did, but the way he did it was just not acceptable to American society.
yeah, yeah.
So that's why it's just how we are in America. We need we need to have a process,
I
right?
know, I know. We got to have all the red
Uh,
tape.
yeah, yeah, and just that structure that people can sort of look at and understand,
Yeah,
even though it's difficult to understand. But
yeah.
but there's forms, so I guess that makes everything better. But every every doctor that participates has a form,
Yeah.
that they can download from the state health authority,
Hmm.
and the consulting doctor and the person going, making the request all have. All have forms that they fill out,
Yeah.
and that's the way they keep track of that documentation and things. And so again, it's just the
I
way
know.
America
I
works, that
know.
we want to have data, we want to have all that
I
stuff.
know. And again, there are some good reasons for it. So I'm not going to poo-poo that, too much. But all right, since we talked about the states, I'm going to have to bring it up because anybody who follows me on social media saw my rage on the day it happened. But tell us a little bit about what happened with West Virginia.
So in West Virginia, I have to point out, is like Ohio, was like Ohio. In Ohio, we already have our revised code, our laws already state that if somebody provides the means for another person to die by suicide, that person can be prosecuted a third-degree felony for assisting a suicide.
Hmm.
So West Virginia had that, but a legislator in West Virginia wanted to make sure that the concept of a medical aid in dying law in the future just was never a possibility. And so they got West Virginia state legislature to put before West Virginia voters a constitutional amendment prohibiting what they call medically assisted death, suicides, excuse me, and euthanasia. But it also had language continuing to allow the death penalty. So it was kind of a interesting combination of things. So
Okay. Okay.
they sort of quickly went through this process. There was not a lot of discussion to say, hey, what the heck are you talking about? What does this encompass? And so the voters voted to pass that, and they have now put that into their constitution, prohibiting that. So medical aid in dying laws cannot be passed in the future there. And so we truly do not want to see that happen here or in other states.
Yeah.
So we are truly dedicated to this process of talking about what the laws are, working on those misconceptions, and just saying, tell me what you know about it, and let's talk about
Yeah.
the scenario in which somebody really wants to do this as an option.
Yeah. And that's thank you. Thank you very much for that eloquent answer. That's why I asked you instead of me explaining it because I would just get mad. There's we need to have the facts. Can't all be emotion, and I am very hot-headed. But since we brought that up, I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit on Vermont because Vermont removed their residency restriction. So for those of you who don't understand that, in states where it is legal and you cannot obtain this unless you are a resident of that state, except for Vermont. And I believe Oregon removed theirs too, right? Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So Vermont was the most recent. And so anybody can apply to receive medical aid in dying in Vermont, even if you are not a resident there. And I was very happy to hear that. However, I'm in my death doula circuits. I work, talk to a lot of death doulas around the country, and there's a lot of hubbub about what they're calling, and I hate using this term, death tourism in Vermont, where people are not flooding, but there are a lot of people running up there to get medical aid in dying because it's not available where they are. And they're having a bit of trouble finding places to put these people for their final days. So, again, I applaud Vermont for doing that, but I'm also scared for them because I can't imagine what they're going through up there with trying to find places for these people because it's not like you can just take it and then go back home. You have to do it there. So I don't know.
Yeah. So there's a lot to that. Oregon and Vermont did it in a very similar time frame. And they both have, so there's lots of elements to this.
I know.
One is that both of these states have volunteer organizations specifically created to help facilitate this process for people who make this choice.
Okay.
In Oregon, it's called End of Life Choices Oregon. In Vermont, it's called Patient Choices Vermont. And if you go to their website, they actually have really clear pages saying, hey, are you somebody from out of state? Here's what you need to know.
Yeah.
And in addition to those groups, there's a group called it's just about to change its name. Right now, it's called the American Clinicians Academy on Medical Aid in Dying. And they also can help facilitate the process and for people who make the request. So there's a lot going on, not only with the technicalities of the travel there. You do, first and foremost, people who make this request and start the process there have to understand that they must ingest the medication in those states if they qualify.
Yep.
They have to have the expectation that that is where they're going to die. And so the technical process of where are they physically going to be is absolutely a part of this process. But the other process is understanding that they have to find two providers who are going to see them, who are knowledgeable about this, and willing to participate with somebody out of state. So you're right, taking away that residency requirement has really opened up, the ability for people to possibly qualify for the option, but also the real need for more education around this for healthcare providers in all levels, hospices, nurses, caregivers, physicians, which I'll kind of bring back to that American Clinicians Academy on medical aid and dying, because they do have a lot of great education surrounding the issue. And so raising awareness that it exists at all, and then how the heck do we provide care to people who request this option, as well as where the heck do we go for this? So those volunteer organizations are absolutely critical to the process, and yet they are busy. They need funding. So donations to those organizations by people who care are also helpful.
Yeah. Thank you for, clarifying and explaining that a little bit better than I would. And so if you're listening in Vermont and you want to volunteer, contact those organizations. I'm sure they could use your help. My husband and I are like obsessed with Vermont for a lot of reasons. And since all this has come to fruition, I'm even just that much more in love with that little state. And yeah, I would love to volunteer my time if it wasn't a 13-hour drive for me. A bit of a commute to help out.
I'll just share a quick anecdote. It was really interesting because we find that in Ohio, it can be a question of equity, right?
Right.
We know people who never move 5 miles from their home, or they've lived for generations on their farm,
Mhm.
and yet they really may want to access this
Yeah.
and have no ability
Right.
to follow through with the process.
Yeah.
So that's why we do really feel like we should be having this discussion in Ohio, to say that there are real Ohioans who don't have any desire to travel outside of the
Yeah.
state to access this option.
Yeah. And since we are in a state that does not allow it, or if there's cases, in other states, like you just mentioned, there's somebody who doesn't want to leave their home. Like I would rather be in my home, and that's a whole other discussion. But and I have spoken with a couple people, and I'm not going to name names, obviously, but there's somebody I know personally. I'm kind of talking with a lot now. Her husband has Alzheimer's, and they have made the decision when he was diagnosed, while he was still able to make the decision, that he wanted to pursue VSED, which is voluntary stopping eating and drinking. And they have a whole plan worked out. They have when it gets time for hospice, or when they decide he gets to a certain point that they agreed upon, they're going to start that process. So with that, we know that VSED is an option for anybody who wants to pursue it. But what other type of comfort care measures do we have here in Ohio, at least, for people at end of life?
So people can make, they can make decisions at the time. They can, if they are diagnosed with a serious or terminal illness, they can recognize that they don't have to make the decision to start treatment.
Mm-hmm.
They can start treatment and then decide to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
They can, make decisions about what type of care, if they wanted, if they were terminally ill and their heart stopped. That whole concept of DNRCC
Yeah.
form, which is quite confusing in Ohio.
Yeah. Oh,
They
yeah.
can make decisions ahead of time for the type of care. We touched on this in the living will, for what type of care they want if they are no longer able to make that decision for themselves. And that kicks in. I need to specify that the living will kicks in if a person is both terminally ill and unable to make their own choices,
Mm-hmm.
or in a permanent unconscious state.
Right.
So people don't recognize that they've really, gone quite far down the path of their, from a serious illness to a terminal illness to for that to kick into place. But it's still helpful to recognize that they can decide, if I'm no longer able to swallow, it's not necessarily beneficial to do that feeding tube that people will want to talk to you about.
Right.
Or to be to have a resuscitation attempted, and if successful, live with an intubation and a ventilator.
Mm-hmm.
So it's having a really being able to ask questions, I think, in the healthcare setting.
Mm-hmm.
When they say, hey, do you have an advance directive? And instead of checking that box, yes or no, say, hey, doc, can we schedule time to actually review that?
Yeah.
Because they can be reimbursed now to have discussions about those, end of life care.
Good.
So that's important, that people rarely take advantage of, and many physicians, quite frankly, are not trained or comfortable with.
Yeah.
So this kind of gives you an opportunity to suss that out a little bit and say, hey, this person is like, what are you talking about? That's down the road. We don't need to go there.
No.
Well,
that is my hill to die on.
There.
I want everybody to fill out their damn living will. I don't care how young and healthy you are. If you are over the age of 18, fill out your damn living will.
Right. And it changes over time, right?
Yeah.
So you fill it out at 18 with one set of thoughts. And depending on, what happens over life, you revisit it, right?
Yeah.
It's not a one and done.
Yeah, absolutely. You can change it at anyway, we could go all day.
Yes. Yes. So, I don't know what your original question was, but I hope that answered it.
I was just talking about.
Yeah. So the other piece to that that we're really trying to talk about more now is what's called a dementia directive. and some of the choices that can be made once someone is in a state living with dementia or Alzheimer's where they're no longer able to make decisions. And it's really specific to that scenario. We do not have a formal one that has been approved legally in Ohio. So right now, like the state of Washington has a really good one. I think New York has a really good one. More groups are working on those types of things. And I think it's great guidance, again, to start understanding some of the decisions that have to be made later. Write down what you want them to be. And then again, have that conversation to communicate when and why, based on what experience brings you to this decision making. But that whole scenario, so that anyone who is helping make that decision when you haven't lost or have lost the ability to make decisions has a really good way to explain, who you are, why you're making decisions, and why they think it's relevant now. And so do add that piece to a living will advanced directive packet. Add a dementia directive.
Yeah. And these are also ways death doulas can help. Not to pimp myself, but I got to pimp us death doulas out there.
I'm all for it. That's awesome.
Yeah. All the things that we just talked about, so many people don't know. Either they don't know they exist, they don't know how to do, they don't know anything about them. And I like half the time, my first like 2 or 3 meetings with any family I work with is explaining all this to them. Like, here, you have all these options available to you, and let's get this done. I want your end of life experience to be as beautiful and perfect as possible. Hollywood does us a disservice, like you said. It's not going to go like the movies, but I'm going to do everything in my power to make it as pleasant as I can. So hire a death doula.
Thank you to you, because that I just, and you're also able to recognize the scenarios that may start to play out, that you say, hey, you know what, we're in the process of getting to that point where this becomes relevant, or hey, that point is past, it's relevant now.
Yeah.
Your proxy needs to be making these decisions, and you can help, bring back those conversations. You can help, revisit some of the things that happened, because you've created the space to have those discussions, and these people are willing to recognize that they need to be making decisions because they're nearing their final days. And you and I know that some people will never reach that point.
No, they don't. No, they don't. And it's heartbreaking, but I'm not going to, change I'm not going to force anybody to talk to me or, make these decisions if they don't want to. But there's so many people that just feel like everybody feels like they have more time. Even if your doctor's like, you may have weeks left, people don't understand that's not like a hard deadline. We don't have a firm expiration date. I've seen doctors say, I think mom's going to be around another 2 weeks, and she's dead the next day. We can't control this, which is why we need to have these conversations. So,
well, and I think, I'm going to bring that back to medical aid in dying. It's got that timeline to qualify of having 6 months or less to live. And as you say, that prognostication can be difficult. And I think this brings also back the concept of having educated providers, so that they are providing care during this process. If a person lives longer than that 6-month prognosis, there's no countdown clock that starts ticking when they qualify. So if it's at 8 months and they are doing pretty well, then you revisit. Are we still, are you still qualified? Do you still have the capacity to make the decision? Should you want to make it? Are you physically able to ingest it? So that prognostication piece of it, the timeline piece of it, is not hard and fast, right? It's
right.
And you should, we're happy that our loved ones live beyond that time frame. So
so we all hope.
But we want them to be getting the appropriate care during that time.
Yes. And real quickly, because we're getting here we're coming up, getting towards the end of time here, but there are just a couple other quick things I want to get out there. First of all, I appreciate that you brought up multiple times that I feel like we should clarify that if somebody's approved for this, they have to be able to ingest it themselves. Their family members can't give it to them. Nobody else can do it for them. They have to do it themselves. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I appreciate that that is a stipulation in there. And what was the other one? See, I just lost my train of thought too. Um,
Yeah, and that's
oh,
really
right,
based on the fact that it's the last voluntary act, right?
right,
Is
right.
is the ingestion.
So, and then the last thing I just wanted to kind of mention, and we don't have to get too into the weeds with it, but the fact that we are referring to this and it is called medical aid in dying and not assisted suicide anymore. Um, I appreciate that too, because I feel like this is such a hot subject and people have emotional reactions to it. And even more so when you hear the word suicide, which I don't like, because suicide is something that happens. People do this, we try to say, somebody died by suicide. It's a thing that happens, but we are veering away from using that term in this instance because of that stigma, which I don't like, but I also appreciate because when people hear the word assisted suicide, they're gonna be like, oh my God, no, we can't do that. That's horrible. But if you're bringing it a more compassionate approach, um, which is the last like point I kind of want to make, and we can, if you want to chime in on it too, there's just a compassion part of this. Like people who are so strongly against it, I can understand why they might feel that way. There's a lot of stigma around, especially when it comes to certain faiths. There's a lot of things that they believe when it comes to taking your own life. But if you have ever witnessed somebody die in agony, it's hard and it's awful. And I have, and I just want these options to be there for somebody. I'm not saying you have to follow through, but it's a compassionate way to say that it's okay. You don't have to die horribly because it's not like the movies.
No, thank you. I also carry that um, responsibility of the people who've shared those experiences with me, who say we have to make change to bring this option
Yeah,
to Ohioans, because we have to recognize that these are people who have no choice about going on with their life.
right.
It's ending.
Yeah,
Their body is done.
yeah,
People want to live,
of
and
course.
yet they recognize that their days are numbered and they really want to be the one who decides what that last day looks like. That's what my stepfather wanted. That's what so many people who've done this have wanted. And so that sense of being able to control that final day is just empowering to them.
Yeah, yeah. And that's just it
And
to be able to. Sorry, go ahead.
everybody's different. There are people who would never in a million years want this as an option,
Yeah,
but it is just an option.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
for those who really truly understand what the end of their days, that it's actually coming,
Yeah,
they're dying soon, and they just want to say who's going to be at my bedside. They want to
yeah,
say
yeah.
what music is going to be playing,
Hmm.
things like that. So I think giving them the ability to make those decisions is just
Yeah.
really what we're working toward
Mhm.
in Ohio.
And there's a lot of beautiful documentaries out there. And I'm blanking on names right now, but I know I've watched a couple on this where they have shown what a beautiful experience it can be, where they can watch their favorite movie, hang out with their family, say their final things, and then, not go through this process of it could be days, it could be weeks of suffering, not just for the person who's dying, but for the family who has to witness it. So if I find
I
those, I'll
asked,
go ahead.
yeah, How to Die in Oregon is one. There's Take Me Out Feet First as a
Take Me Out
series.
Feet First. I watched that one. It's amazing.
Yeah, so I will say that about on the 1 year anniversary of my stepdad's death, I asked my mother, looking back, what do you think about this? And she said, I didn't want him to die. I didn't want to lose him, but I also didn't want him to suffer. And I know he didn't want to either.
Hmm.
And she really considers this a gift. And I've heard that word by others. I've seen it in obituaries. Thank your legislators. This was a gift to me and my family. That's remarkable when you take the moment to use that space to acknowledge what a big part of the process this law allows.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Woo, I got all.
Oh, I need to mention,
Nope, please go ahead.
I will say quickly, I don't know if you're able to add, I am the board chair of the national organization called Death with Dignity National Center, as well as being the founder and executive director of Ohio End of Life Options.
Absolutely. We'll leave that in there. So great.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, so like I said, we're at the end of the episode now. So, my tradition at the end of the episode, I pull a random card from the death deck. Although this week I got the end of life deck. So I've already been shuffling it the whole time we've been talking. So I'm just going to pull one at random and I'm going to ask it. I know, I love this. So, okay. Oh, I like this one. When it comes to human touch, A, I accept hugs and gentle massages. B, handle me with care. Please ask permission as I might not be feeling it. Or C, hands off unless I request it.
I would say I'm a combination myself. Sometimes I want permission, people to ask permission, but in general, I love what we used to, my grandmother would sit with us and do what she called tickle touch, just on my back, just a light, use her little nails and just slightly touch. I did that with my son when we would fly and he would be, a little antsy. I would just take his arm and just do that on his up and down his arm, and he would inevitably fall asleep within about 3 minutes. So I love that. I love a good massage. But I want to be a little bit in control of that process if I can.
And I'm right that my answer would be very much the same. I don't mind. I like a good hug from time to time, but I don't like a lot of hugs. And I definitely get, I definitely get a little over with touch. So and I actually wrote out my death plan and I specifically put that in there. I said I was okay with light touch here and there, but please tell me you're going to touch me first, even if I'm not responsive, and limit it to short bursts. Cause long strokes and pets for 20 minutes or whatever, I don't like that. That's too much.
That's excellent. And my birth plan included, if you touch my head, things will not end well for you.
See, that's why we have these birth plans and death plans. So important.
That's right.
Oh, Lisa, this was amazing. I cannot thank you enough. I want to give you a minute here. Tell us where people can find you or where they can find out more information about Ohio End of Life Options and anything else.
Thank you so much. We have a website, ohiooptions.org. And I cannot go forward without mentioning Molly McMahon Graziano, who's our director of outreach. She handles all our social media and most of everything that goes on, and she is incredible. So if you don't reach me, you can reach us at our email address, info@ohiooptions.org. One of us will get back to you, and we really want to talk to you. So please reach out.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. This was amazing. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to talk with me today.
And thank you. This is remarkable. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Okay, another huge thank you to Lisa. Lisa, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming on my show and talking to us all about medical aid in dying and what you do with Ohio End of Life Options. I have tons of links in the show notes. I put links to the documentaries we talked about, where you can find Lisa at Ohio End of Life Options. I put their website in there, and yeah, all sorts of good stuff. So check that out if you are so inclined. Thank you again, Lisa. I was looking forward to this episode for quite some time. I'm so glad we could make this happen. As always, you can find me at nikkithedeathdoula.com. And if you would like to share a story of grief, or if you have thoughts, feelings, critiques, whatever on my podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out to me through my website, nikkithedeathdoula.com. And with that, thank you so much. I hope you have an amazing week. And remember, as always, your grief is yours, your feelings are valid, and grief doesn't always have to suck. Good Grief with Nikki the Death Doula is produced by Nikki Smith of Nikki the Death Doula LLC in Columbus, Ohio. Nikki the Death Doula LLC is for consulting, education, emotional support, and guidance, and is no way considered a funeral establishment or licensed mental health establishment. Scripts, editing, sound design, literally everything with this podcast is done solely by Nikki Smith of Nikki the Death Doula LLC, with the exception of the music. The music is Cheery Monday by Kevin MacLeod. Licensing information can be found at filmmusic.io.